Farmer Peter Keane from Moy River said to us that the disaster that has hit agriculture, or in particular those who breed with livestock in agriculture, is the worst since the Rinderpest in 1897. Well, the farmers seem to have been left in the lurch pretty much everywhere you look. And now along comes a business organization, Sakeliga, who are going into bat and very strongly for the farmers. Piet Le Roux is the chief executive of Sakeliga, and I can tell you from watching their record, when they get involved, the guys on the other side better watch out. Piet, I'm sure farmers are delighted to hear that you are throwing your hat into the ring here, starting to get involved. It's not really your area, though, agriculture. So why is a business body getting involved in this area?
Alec, when things become a systemic problem endangering the economic order of substantial size and impact, then we get involved. We are there to safeguard a flourishing economic order. And how the government's been dealing with this foot-and-mouth disease and how it's proliferated is causing systemic problems. It's the same with Black Economic Empowerment, BEE, which we have in various industries become involved, not because we are experts in the industry, but because we recognize a pattern of destructive political or policy behavior. And, we've learned some lessons in one domain, and we hope to apply those in another if the underlying problem seems to have a similar origin.
What does systemic mean?
It means that it's big. It means that people tend to speak about industries. You often get industry bodies, and they exist for a good reason. They understand the dynamics of an industry, but economies are interwoven. And sometimes when you destabilize one so-called industry for long enough, or you cause a big enough problem there, then you have all sorts of consequences in the processing of the products of that industry later on, in the inputs going into that industry. And in the case of agriculture, as has been reported to us from the farming industry and from bodies that we work with, really huge numbers in finance and heads of cattle and operations are now involved. So that's why we consider it systemic. It's large enough and it's impacting other sectors sufficiently.
Sakeliga is all about state proofing. Maybe you can explain how that works and why this is relevant in the foot and mouth disease issue.
We consider the state not a suitable solution for the problems in South Africa. In theory, you could say that's what the state's role is, X, Y, and Z. But if the state is absent, or it lacks the capacity, or if sometimes it has the desire, or whether it desires to or just does it acts to intervene harmfully, then it's no use discussing what the state's role should be. You have to work with the facts as they are. And the facts in South Africa are such that it's not much use to rely on the state for improving things that are going very wrong, or to improve policy and get involved. So this means that sometimes you need to force the state's hand, or you need to get the state out of the business of what private sector and industry bodies can solve themselves. And in this case, we consider the desired solution to be state-proof. That means for its success, the answer to this problem should not rely on the goodwill of the state, either its changes in policy or its acts of intervention. We need to come up with a solution that does not depend on some minister changing, but on allowing the private sector to solve the problem.
When you have a look at the way that the state has handled foot and mouth disease up to this point, it's not like it's just arrived. There are people, and I suppose because it's been handled in this way, there are many who are now saying, but hang on, this is a deliberate issue. This is a deliberate attempt to destroy the white farmers in South Africa. I've had feedback from someone who was in the room before being kicked out. He's not a white person, who said that within that conversation, it was a very deliberate attempt. Let's sort these guys out once and for all. Is there any credence to what this person has told me, or indeed to what you have discovered in your engagement with people in the industry?
I think it's fair to say that the level of disastrous policy in South Africa is often, at least sometimes, inspired by an animus. Is that the correct word? A dislike for white people. Unfortunately, that's BE. A lot of BE is, in one way, the good interpretation is it's a desire to improve the economic and the social condition of black communities. In that way, it's a desirable objective, at least. But in my dealings with people who try to influence policy or discuss politics, sometimes I have found that the desire is, it's a bit like communism or socialism. It's not a desire to help other people go up, even though it's sold like that. It's actually a dislike of certain classes of people and the desire to see them experience problems. However, in the foot and mouth disease situation, I have not seen that. And no one's relayed experiences like what you've just relayed to me. So I haven't seen that. And I would be surprised to see a big plan to harm white farmers because government's not really good at executing big plans comprehensively and systemically. So I would be surprised if that's the main reason why things are going bad. I think the simpler explanation is a state that wants to intervene, wants to be in control, doesn't have the capacity, and even if it had the capacity, it doesn't have the understanding of what the origins are. The state continues to see itself as having to be central to the solution, while many other diseases are perfectly well dealt with farmers themselves.
So it's that old saying that 1% conspiracy, 99% cock up, and in this case, it's an unholy cock up, but not very funny if you happen to be sitting on the other side. If you're a farmer and your herds are being devastated. Just explain what you meant, that other diseases that are contagious have been handled when the state wasn't involved with them.
Yes, let me first say we act in cooperation with other role players. For example, we've benefited a lot from meetings that have been held with various industry role players. And in this current litigation that we're foreseeing, Alec, we sent out a press release last week to say that we are now considering litigation. We're cooperating with SAI and with Free State Agriculture. And so Sakeliga does not understand the specifics of the agricultural industry, just as we don't understand the specifics of any other industry where we team up with role players to help solve a problem that we do understand. We are being told, and we understand this to be the case, that many animal diseases are perfectly well dealt with by farmers themselves when they administer either preventative or treatment medicine. And this, in the case of foot and mouth disease, the state seems to insist that state veterinarians should be involved or should drive and be at the center of this. In recent weeks, there seems to have been sounds being made by the Minister of Agriculture that private veterinarians will be allowed to assist with this. But we just think get the state veterinarians out of the business. Just since it's almost a national crisis now. And in fact, the Minister of Agriculture has said that he wants to have a national disaster declared. Well, when the fire is raging, you don't prioritize monitoring and quality control, especially from state veterinarians who don't have petrol in their cars to reach all the various places. So I'm just putting it to you, Alec, that farmers relate to us, veterinarians relate to us, industry bodies relate to us, that they can perfectly deal with the administration of this vaccine and the medication they consider appropriate without state intervention.
I farmed for a while, and I certainly applied my fair number of vaccines as well as a farmer. So nobody's telling you pork pies on that side. Farmers know how to do those kind of things, and it's in their interest to be competent at it. But let's just have a look at what's behind all of this, because you have a state-managed or state-controlled disease. It's spreading like wildfire. It's causing untold damage. And yet the farmers are unable to protect themselves. And I suppose that's why you get these conspiracy, maybe, ideas that this is deliberately an attempt to destroy white farmers in South Africa. What would you suggest is the rational way of approaching this?
Well, the first point to make is that calling it a state-controlled disease is a misnomer. The state has lost control of the disease. And the whole idea of a state-controlled disease is that the state gets involved when there are isolated outbreaks, and that the intervention is such that it can stamp out that outbreak, and you deal with isolated cases from time to time. Now it's wildly spread. The state has lost control, but it still maintains the pretense of control. And when you listen to the Minister of Agriculture in his statements in recent weeks, you'd see that he emphasizes the importance of monitoring, and that's why it should remain a state-controlled disease. Our position, and what we've discussed with industry bodies and farmers, is that the state can call it whatever it likes. It can call it a state-monitored disease, a state-controlled disease. That does not allow the state or make it just or fair or any way acceptable for the state to prevent the intervention of farmers and agri businesses when there is a crisis, which is apparently both on the minister's version and on the farmer's version and on the industry body's version, the state right now. It's like saying, the whole mountain's burning, and because somehow mountain fires are the state's responsibility, no farmer may quell the fire when it threatens his property. And just because it's a state property or something, the whole idea of state control should not mean that the farmer or the agribusiness cannot intervene when it affects them. And so it's rather the state's actually trying to make this a state monopolized disease, which is the reason behind the disaster. Of course, diseases spread from time to time. There are outbreaks all over the world, but things can be contained. There's not a shortage of medication that the farmers tell us they need and that the industry bodies tell us they need. It exists all over the world. There's just a shortage in South Africa, and there's a prohibition on the application of that medication. And so that's the situation.
Are there BE gatekeepers on those vaccines? That's been speculated by farmers?
Possibly, although from what I've gathered from discussions with veterinarians, industry role players, and also people who believe that they could be and have been in the process of trying to supply and distribute vaccines in South Africa, animal disease biological companies, they have not relayed to me that BE has been in this case a factor. It could be, but we haven't seen direct evidence of that. I mean, the BE is a larger problem in South Africa. It's the main reason, or one of the main reasons, there's no economic growth in this country. So it's costing at least 5% of GDP per annum. But it's not the primary cause, I think, behind the uncontrolled foot and mouth disease outbreak. That's more just general state control.
Well, thank you for putting that to rest, at least partly. What you have done, though, is you've got a form letter, a proxy letter for farmers to start taking to their attorneys that they can fill in their names and their losses so that the farmers can sue the state, presumably, for the losses that they have incurred through this foot and mouth disease epidemic, which is continuing. That's an unusual step. Why did you go there?
Well, Alec, it's because of that word state-controlled disease. If the state insists on being in control of something, then it brings onto itself a higher level of responsibility to manage the consequences. And especially now that it's in its interpretation of state control preventing agribusinesses and farmers and so on from taking measures of their own, that increases yet again the onus of responsibility that relies on them. And upon the discussions with our attorneys, and we understand there to be good reason for possible future claims against the state if it continues to insist on its monopolized control of the disease and its monopoly on interventions. And so it will not be straightforward, but we believe that it has now become appropriate for farmers and industry organizations, for businesses, to keep track of their losses and to notify the parties, as we set that out in that template letter, that they consider them responsible for preventing the agribusiness or the farmer from intervening themselves. And so there are jurisprudence in South Africa. There is jurisprudence that supports such a view. But we do stress that it depends, as in all legal matters, on the facts in each case. And so even though we have provided this template, it should be carefully studied carefully used and in conjunction with a consultation with the business's own attorneys. It's not a magic wand, but it does, and we hope that it would help the business, the affected business, and his attorneys consider the legal remedies available to this. Additionally, I think it also adds to it helps to tell the Minister of Agriculture what time it is, because it alerts him, I hope, to the very real legal and monetary consequences that the state is facing if it continues to prevent and obstruct or in somehow disrupt private solutions to what it wants to call a national disaster.
You guys work very, very cleverly through the courts, through the court of law. And if South Africa wants to be seen as a law-abiding country, a member of the international community, it's got to follow what happens in the law courts. But in this case, are there any precedents that you will be able to apply for what you are giving farmers to use in their case against somebody, and one expects the government?
We refer in that template letter and in the note that precedes it to the Carmichael case, or Carmichael. I'm not sure about the pronunciation at this moment. But again, it's on the advice of our attorneys that there does exist jurisprudence that could be referenced in notifications of this nature to the state. So, Alec, there are in many areas, domains of law, both in South Africa and internationally, good precedent for if a state wants to monopolize something, and then it brings onto itself a higher level of responsibility. And it is time to alert the state to that. And we recommend closely studying that letter that we've provided in conjunction with your attorneys to consider whether it's appropriate in each farmer's case.
When you take it one step further, and you mentioned that the Minister of Agriculture, you're talking about the leader of the once official opposition, but now part of the government, the Democratic Alliance. You say that he should see what the time is. But if there's massive losses for the state, he doesn't pay anything. The bureaucrats don't pay anything. They just carry on. They can carry on until the gates of hell. Is there no case here for attacking the individuals who are applying these laws, or certainly not budging on laws, when every rational person in the world should say, but surely give the farmers the ability to protect their own assets?
Yeah, like we've often considered, and I wish, and many people have requested us to go after state officials in their personal capacity. And we have done that on one or two occasions. Unfortunately, the South African law, and this is, again, I'm not a lawyer, we do this on advice of our attorneys, and it's not that appropriate to get right out of the gates and target people in their individual capacity when they act in a state capacity. So that's not no golden silver bullet there for that one, Alec. But we are, as Sakeliga, together with our collaborators in this instance so far, SAI and Free State Agriculture, we are currently considering alternative legal steps which will be directed at removing the obstructions or restrictions of the state, that is either the Department of Agriculture or the Agricultural Research Council or any of the related bodies to the chain of vaccine supply or medication supply and administration. And so currently, in general terms, I'd say you'd like to get the state out of the import of vaccine, out of the sale of vaccines and medication, out of the distribution of vaccines and medication, and out of the administration of vaccines and medication. If it wants, it can ask for reports about what has been administered or what has been distributed, but why should it have any role in actually doing any of those four things? And so currently, besides the legal letter that we have provided that we hope farmers and businesses consider in conjunction with their attorneys, we are currently considering legal remedies to remove the state's obstructions or restrictions. And through the course of this week, I hope that we get more clarity on the prospects for success for that. Alec, Sakeliga often litigates and we're experienced with it. So I can assure you that we're giving it our best attention. Although not all problems in South Africa are remediable by litigation, we hope that this one is, and once we have made a call on that, we'll be clear about that.
Just from an outsider's perspective, surely an urgent interdict is what is needed now, because the state it's dragging its feet. Steenhuisen, when was it, 2 weeks ago, had a press conference, terrible tragedy. We're going to address it. Well, we've heard nothing since then. Certainly aren't any vaccines that have been flooding into the country. Don't you need something aggressive like that? An urgent interdict, get the state out the way. At least the farmers can protect the herds that they still have left.
Yeah, Alec, talking of 10-year plans for foot-and-mouth disease eradication in South Africa is really not interesting to farmers who are facing the next 10 days, 10 weeks, and 10 months, which is a survival question to them. So urgent interdict is something that we're looking at, Alec, and once we have clarity on that, our team's working on it. We're checking in with our collaborators at Free State Agri and at SAI, and we hope to make as urgent as possible a move in litigation.
Why is John Steenhuisen, in your opinion, now we're asking for your opinion here, why is he backing these bureaucrats when the whole reason why he's in government in the first place is to be able to hold those people to account, and yet he seems to be supporting them, defending them, and taking their side against the farming community?
Yeah, like it's disappointing. It's disappointing. We've had some run-ins with Minister Steenhuisen since he became Minister of Agriculture, and we had hoped not to have to continue our work against his predecessor. His predecessors actually, they developed what's called Agri-BEE policy. It's not even it's a policy that basically says BEEify the whole industry. It includes restrictions on duty-free imports and exports, exemptions. It includes certain levies for funds in various industries that are dedicated for so-called transformation, which is just BEE. And Minister Steenhuisen has defended on all crucial points, either defended or continued his predecessor's policies so far. And even we later went more public with that. Initially, we just wrote him letters, very politely reminding him of what the problem was with his predecessor, requesting a change. And we have not seen that from him. And so let me not speculate on the reasons for it. As things stand now, the fact is that Minister Steenhuisen has very much made far fewer changes from his predecessor's policies than we had hoped for.
So we the people look back and we say politicians are all the bloody same. And I'm afraid the action tends to suggest that is what's occurring. Okay, so you've said that it's not deliberate by the bureaucrats, that they haven't moved in the right direction. For what reason then, if it's not deliberate? Why are they dragging their heels? Why are they seeing this disaster around them? Not just the white farmers. There are many, many small farmers who are getting smashed by this thing too.
Well, Alec, let's zoom out of farming. Let's look at things that one would say is in the government's interest to keep going. Look at SASSA, 20 million odd something payments per month through SASSA and various other government handouts. That's not working well. Look at government education. You'd say it's in the government's interest to sell the success of how it's transformed education in this country, and it's not doing so. Now, I know some people say the government's deliberately sabotaging education because uneducated voters would vote for the ANC and so on. I think it's just we are trying to find too much method in the madness. There is sometimes method in the madness, but the reason the country is basically falling apart in many domains and many areas is not because the government wants it to fall apart. There are very incapable people in the South African state and in the government, and they have very wrong ideas. And then it seems that we have a system in place that keeps reproducing the same results. Last year, Alec, I think I mentioned it on your show, we tried and we are involved in some of the recovery efforts in local towns across the country. Now, a town like Lichtenburg, which is now a sizable town with a sizable agri and other industries around it, That town is basically, its municipality has fallen apart. And through that process of trying to make that town recover and our interventions, the minister, the MEC for Kokta in Northwest, actually said on national television last year that they are not even going to encourage a new election by disbanding the municipal council, because it will just produce the same result. Now, if even the MEC of Kokta of Northwest, he's a senior ANC person and an ANC appointee, is saying that something in the system is wrong if it keeps producing the same results, then Alec, I'd like to echo that. And I don't have answers for you in this program, but somehow the way in which we, as a society and as communities, come up with who runs which part of the country in which way is not working and needs to be reformed. And this will need to be a process of several years. But currently, we're right on the wrong course, and more and more failure is bound to set in. And we're not looking at an overnight collapse, but we are looking at a collapse if we don't intervene in the next several years. Let me not put a time limit on that.
Piet, from your perspective, let's just say that you are successful in your application to the court. What would the consequence of that be for other state industries which we're seeing similar disasters occurring in?
It's unlikely that there would be immediate implications. Possibly, it's always possible that the state keeps taking something on appeal and it becomes a principle, ends up in the Constitutional Court and forms jurisprudence which can inform other decisions, the kind to which we refer in that letter. But it's possible, Alec. At this stage, we're just trying to fight the fire in this industry with the expertise or the knowledge or the understanding that we have developed from similar problems in other areas. So I guess the best scale effect here right now is that Sakeliga we've built a vehicle, an organization with a capability to understand the underlying problems when economic disorder appears. And once we see that, once we learn to solve that in one domain, it's a quicker path to success in another. I think that's the method of scale we're aiming for currently.
And what happens if the court kicks you out? What's your plan B?
Alec, I think some farmers have already started treating their animals in ways and controlling animal movement and monitoring animal movement in ways that I think technically they're not allowed to do. And I think that's perfectly acceptable in an emergency situation. And they are considering their legal risks as they do that, possibly in conjunction with their attorneys. So solving every problem in the economy or in a specific sector, I don't consider Sakeliga's role. Sometimes we do what we can and we need to. And eventually a problem, if it doesn't get solved that way, becomes large enough for people to solve it in their own way. And the government possibly disappears from the scene. If it doesn't, if the government keeps monopolizing things, then it's a bad time that lies ahead for the industry. So I look at it's going to depend on the ingenuity and I suppose bravery of many organizations and businesses over the next few years, whether we get through state obstructionism.
But the state monopolizes violence. That's what it has. It's got the guns. And as a consequence of that, if it was to take a hard line, this could really spiral out of control, because given that you're talking about a sector of the community that has been under fire for a long time and indeed is well armed.
It's true that the state aspires to monopolize violence, and there is the classical theory of the state, at least since Hobbes several centuries ago. But in practice, the state is not all-powerful. And just consider what happened during the KZN riots a few years ago. It was not the state who quelled that unrest, those riots, that plundering. It was people who blockaded streets, who took measures that is nowhere for provided strictly in positive law. And consider the proliferation of private security guards. That just shows you that the state does not monopolize violence in South Africa. In fact, it's probably only being kept under control because of private security guards. In so many domains, Alec, the South African state is very far removed from classical state theory. That does not mean that one must not act judiciously, that one must not be careful in one's confrontations with the state or stepping into the void where the state ceases to matter. But it does. That's part of the reality that we face, Alec. The state is not all powerful, and sometimes it leaves voids. And I think anybody who lives in Platteland, South Africa, knows that the theory of what the state should be doing and is doing and can prevent you from doing is not always real. That's why people are filling potholes. Why people are putting power to stoplights, robots, electric street traffic lights. That's why people are sometimes catching people on national roads or fighting fires in different ways. I like the theory of the state being all powerful is not applicable in South Africa. But the state can be dangerous and can be harmful. It can also do positive and good things, Alec. But let's put that aside, because the problem now is what the state is omitting to do, what it should, or where it's harmfully interfering. There, my recommendation is just that people should be careful and judicious in their application of doing what is necessary under circumstances. And it's the same risk people have faced all through history. Sometimes a bad guy is strong enough, or someone does the wrong thing, but he's strong enough to harm you if you resist. And you have to make that trade-off and decision, and do so judiciously and not brazenly.
But if you were to look at the cabinet of South Africa, and you were to pick one person that you think would have the common sense to be able to understand what's really happening and to make the right decisions, Steenhuisen would be up there somewhere in that list. And yet, have you engaged with him? Has he opened his mind, or has he really just become what many people criticize him of, as a pawn of the ANC?
Enough about Mr. Steenhuisen. I don't think he's the reason for the problem, and I don't think swapping out Mr. Steenhuisen with one other person would solve the problem overnight. I'm sure Mr. Steenhuisen could do a better job, and I'm sure this situation could have been alleviated if he had acted differently. But the general problem is not limited to the minister in place at any one particular point, Alec. There's too much going wrong all around us. It doesn't seem like a change of ministers, a change of guard is what's going to help us. I think there's something rotten in the way the whole state structure gets propped up with a collection of so many people who seem to just tie each other down in doing what's necessary at the right moment.
You've got to wonder how long we, the people, will continue to pay their taxes and pass on this mirage of power that exists in a central area, which just doesn't have it anymore, because when they're supposed to come to the party, well, we know the consequences, as you said, in 2021, in July, now this foot and mouth disease. And yet many of the townies are completely oblivious to what's happening, what's really happening to the national herd. Has it reached the point of no return? Has it got to a point where South Africa, from being a food exporter, is going to be threatened with having to import its meat in future?
I like if from what we are being told by people in the industry, there's a real risk to the viability of many farming businesses. Whether that spills over to having to import or not, I can't tell you. I wouldn't venture a guess. But the matter is serious enough that it threatens the livelihood of many businesses and all the connected businesses to them. So that's why we're involved. And whether it means beef has to be imported or not is not fundamental to our decision to become involved. There's an obvious problem that's large enough, which many in the industry tell us that the key problem to solving a large part of it is government obstructionism, and that they are perfectly capable, these private businesses, to solve the problems themselves. I think that warrants our intervention, and we have been approached, and we look forward to collaborating with the industry role players.
So I'm sure many farmers watching or listening to this are thinking, okay, so what next? What happens? What are the steps from here?
First is, I think, consider our letter that we've included with the press release. It's available on our website. If you would like to go find it, just search for, I think, Google Sakeliga FMD or foot and mouth disease. You should find that. Consider putting the state on notice for future damages, and discuss with your lawyers the contents of that letter and see whether it applies in your case. That will help with the pressure, I think. And then secondly, I think keep doing what's necessary in your own farm, in your own business. I'm not a farmer. I cannot help. I cannot advise you what you should do on your farm. Just do what is best, what you think should be done. You're in the best position as a farmer. And then thirdly, together with industry bodies, we will, from Sakeliga's side, we're seriously looking at litigation. And as soon as we've found an angle that we believe can work, has a reasonable prospect of success, is sound in law, we will move on that. That does take some time, but we have spent time over the weekend, last week. We're working on it as we speak. So as soon as we have clarity on that, we will make an announcement. Then finally, I think there are industry bodies and role players who seem to prefer a different track, or at least in parallel continue their negotiations, discussions with the minister, with the various agri-state entities. I think keep doing that. Just become even more aggressive if you need to. And there's always a room for both a stick and a carrot. So if someone's able to swing a carrot before the Department of Agriculture or the Agricultural Research Council or any of those, swing that carrot as well.
And the urgent interdict, when might that be provided?
Alec, let me not tie myself down to a date. It's the way we always litigate is, as much as we understand the urgency, that's why we're investigating litigation. We litigate as Sakeliga when the litigation team is sure that we have a good prospect of success, that it's sound what we're doing, and then we move without delay. So we are working hard on it, but we need to make sure that we don't get a bad judgment and things turn out even worse. So it's important to pull the trigger when we're ready, and we'll announce when we are ready. For now, we thought it was just important to make it known that we are collaborating with industry bodies to work on litigation, and once we are clear, we'll make an announcement.
And the object of litigation, if I understand you correctly, is simply to let the farmers take care of themselves.
It's one of either of the four. This is in my layman's explanation. It must either diminish or remove the state's obstruction of vaccine and medication imports. It must either remove or diminish the obstruction of the state on vaccine sales. It must either remove or diminish the state's obstruction of distribution. And it must either remove or diminish the state's obstruction of application or administration, the actually applying that medication or vaccines. So any one or four of all four of those areas is what I've asked the team to find us a possibility for.
And just to close off with, what's your track record like when you do go up against government through the courts? How often do you win?
We were a very good track record, Alec. I'd say in upwards of 90% of cases we win, we're successful. That doesn't mean success always comes quickly, and that doesn't mean that eventual success cannot include intermediate or complications along the way. For example, together with NIASA, we are fighting the Employment Equity Amendment Act, which is what wants to tell farmers that they basically can't keep their family business running, that they have to meet some kind of racial quota and in their employment and eventually in their management and so on as well over the next 5 years. So we're fighting that. Now, together with NIASA, we put together a great court case. But an unsound judgment has delayed the eventual success that we hope to have that since September last year. That doesn't mean we give up. We're currently going for the Constitutional Court and both the Supreme Court of Appeal at the same time. So we keep at it until we exhaust all legal avenues in South Africa. That's one of the things. Once we start a case, we want to be very sure that we can defend this all the way to the Constitutional Court. And then if that doesn't work, I don't know if this will be the case in foot and mouth, but for example, on matters like employment equity and BEE, we designed that case so that even if it's even if it's not successful within South African courts, that it can stand up in international eyes and potentially for other uses later on, which we'll get to, which we haven't had to do so far. But that's how we approach litigation, Alex. So we're good at it, but it's no foolproof it's no foolproof method for success.
And it also takes time, as you've explained to us. So you don't rush off, and it's not a knee-jerk reaction here. How long have you been thinking about this one?
Alec, through the course of last year, I took notice of foot and mouth disease, but we focused at that stage on the Expropriation Act, the Driefontein matter. We looked at employment equity, which we're trying to turn that around. Other BE matters, and so on, town recovery at Lichtenburg. And so it's only really earlier this year that I thought, shish, this thing seems just to be taking off. Alec, in part through what you've been revealing through your shows. I watched that interview with the KZN farmers, the veterinarians, and the other ones you've been doing. And that alerted me to this being a serious problem that now seemed to keep growing. And then we looked at that press conference by Minister Steenhuisen, where he said he wants to declare it a national disaster. And Alec, we've had our experiences through lockdown and COVID with so-called national disasters, and all of that just seemed to have made things worse. Now, maybe it does or maybe it doesn't in the case of foot and mouth disease, but that's what prompted me to get in touch with our legal team. And during the course of the last 2 weeks, we were then also approached by various agricultural organizations and some farmers and some veterinarians. Even this morning, I had some calls. So it seems like people thought this was a job for Sakeliga to become involved with, and I think it's justified. We can't guarantee success, but we're gonna aid the farmers who say we want to do something about this ourselves.
And on that letter that is on the Sakeliga website, and it's Sakeliga as you say it, .co.za. The Minister of Agriculture, it's the email addresses, the Department of Agriculture, and the Chief Director of Veterinary Services. All of their information is there, so your lawyers have actually got an easy run. They've got a pro forma letter, add in what you need to, and you don't have to do as much work as you would otherwise have to. Piet Le Roux is the Chief Executive of Sakeliga. I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.